Independent alternative political parties are as important as independent alternative journalism and media. Now, let me say that again. Independent alternative political parties are as important as independent alternative journalism and media, which you're all enjoying right now. Now, if we could grow independent political parties and candidates at the same rate that we're growing independent media, there's a chance we could make significant change. More and more people each day are becoming aware of independent media, and they're doing this because they're seeing that we're mostly being fed skewed narratives from supposed journalists who don't even do the research or due diligence. And because of this, independent media is growing rapidly. People are awake. The same thing is beginning to happen with independent candidates. More and more people identify today as independent than ever before. But the problem is, independent parties have a much harder time breaking through than independent media, who have platforms like Rumble, YouTube, Substack, Twitter, and other outlets. Independent candidates have many more hurdles to jump through if they want to actually get elected. Here to explain the challenges third parties and third-party candidates face is none other than Dr. Jill Stein, former Green Party presidential candidate. Dr. Jill Stein, thank you so much for being here. No one better to talk about this than with you. At this time, since you face this. I have to say, I'm really honored and excited to talk to the most powerful woman in the country. You apparently single-handedly got Donald Trump elected. You've single-handedly overturned Roe v. Wade. I mean, you've been blamed for all of these things. You're very powerful. How does that make you feel? Do you feel the power in your palms?
Well, I feel like it's a badge of honor to have this label, and it's the spoiler. It is the Russian asset. I mean, I have a gazillion labels, and I clearly have political power in my two hands. So hey, let's
Yeah.
use it.
Yeah. Do you still get those attacks? How is that, just from a personal perspective? We see this all the time in the media, social media. People really went after you. How has this affected you on a personal level? I mean, when you're walking down the street or you're in a grocery store, do people come up to you and say it's your fault we have Donald Trump? Especially when we have
Um,
Donald Trump.
Yeah, so it's funny. I feel like I'm a walking barometer on kind of political opinion. I live in a sort of, liberalish community, and I can feel the politics go up and down when people are really pissed off, and they are right now. Even liberal America is having a really hard time, and it's far less, I think, uniform than it used to be. And I just see lots of people are breaking away and making kind of overtures to me around all kinds of things.
Oh,
And
really?
and when people are feeling very, um, Trump focused or Republican focused, then I get a lot of crap. And, I'll get attacked in public gatherings, not physically, but, in a very hostile way. I got attacked on social media all the time. I had to think about what was the security going to be at the Rage rally, because there are people who threaten me, and I had to worry about, well, are they going to show up? And I have to worry about announcing my presence anywhere. So it's a pain in the butt, but I mean, it feels like it's just kind of a sign of our very divisive and violent times, and I think we all carry the burden of that in different ways.
So that even happens now, even now with Joe Biden in office. You're still feeling that. How was it amplified much greater when Trump won?
Yes, definitely. But it's not gone away. And, people right now are thinking 2024, and they're very mindful that independent political, um, people and movements are in so many people's mind, they're a threat to democracy. They're not a threat to democracy. They are really the substance of democracy. And without, it's like the comparison to independent alternative media. If we don't have independent alternative media, we really don't have a free press. And the same is true, in my view, politically. If all we have are the uniparty, really, of the war machine and Wall Street, it's also hopeless, and we don't have a democracy. And without a democracy, we really don't stand a chance of fixing these existential crises that are really converging on us right now, of which the war, which is, every day closer to a nuclear meltdown, that's just one, and then you also have the climate collapse, which is going on sort of out of view right now because it's been upstaged by the emergency of the war and the potential for a nuclear confrontation. We have that, we have the collapsing economy, and we have this all-out real collapse of our democracy as well on virtually every front. So, in my view, we can't go down quietly here into this dark night. We have to stand up and fight it. And in the words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. And independent political parties bring that demand into political discourse. And without that demand, we're really held hostage by the parties of war and Wall Street. And what we get is what we're going to keep on getting. And we get closer and closer to the edge right now. This war alone is just endangering and impoverishing us to the extent that we really do not have a future if this war is allowed to go on. And the same is true of these many other converging crises that won't wipe us out quite as quickly as a nuclear confrontation, but it is no less dangerous, just in a slightly different time frame.
Yeah, and this is why I really want to kind of bring sort of make the parallel with independent media and independent parties and independent candidates, because I think so many people are very aware of the importance now of independent media. And we've seen the attacks on independent media, which are very similar to what third-party candidates have received, which is being called conspiracy theorists, Putin puppets, right? I get called Kremlin Kim, and there's a lot of independent media is under attack. Independent media, the people that are out there, Matt Taibbi, when he put out the Twitter files on Twitter, people were attacking him. People attack Glenn Greenwald. These are some of the best journalists of our era, and they're being attacked. Chris Hedges, they're being labeled and smeared, and I think people are really aware of that smearing. They're aware of that. They still consume independent media. They say, yeah, but mainstream media is it's just a shill for the establishment. They don't even do their journalism. They don't do research anymore. They just talk in unison. Like the Hunter Biden laptop, it was just in unison. This is fake. This is Russian propaganda. Only for them to have to unwind everything a year or so later, where then they'd say, oh, okay, well, whoops, actually, it's real. Whoops, actually, we weren't journalists at all. People are really aware of this, but I still think there's a little disconnect when it comes to the major political parties and the plight of independent parties, that it's a very similar dynamic, that you do have a free press when you have independent journalists. You have democracy when you have these third-party candidates, when you have these third parties that are available to people. But the issue is, there's more, people feel there's more on the line with an independent candidate and political party than independent journalism. With us, we are considered spreading conspiracy theories, right? So they get us for that. Look what you're doing. You're spreading false narratives and spreading conspiracy theories. And with independent candidates, the smear is, you made it to where the candidate I wanted lost. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have this demagoguery, this fascist dictator person in power. That is much more, people feel a lot more emotionally attached to that than if whether or not the person they talked their neighbor watches independent media or watches a media personality they don't like, they might scoff at that person, they might not like that person, but it's definitely more visceral when they feel like you were the reason. Your vote, I know you were the candidate, but those of us who supported you were also demonized as, how dare you?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
many of us that decided to vote third party, especially in that 2016 election, what people don't seem to realize, what do you say to people when they say, you caused Donald Trump to win? Because in their mind, they're obviously thinking, if a person didn't vote for you, they think if I wouldn't have voted for you, I would have voted for Hillary Clinton, right? That's their thinking. What do you say to them when they make that accusation of you?
The facts do not support that. The facts are very clear, and that this is really a case of voter shaming. And, that's not what our democracy needs. This is an example of the arrogance of the Democratic Party, which is why people have walked away from the Democratic Party. It was during the midterms with Obama that the Democrats lost their majority, their supermajority, in fact, in Congress. They lost gubernatorial seats. They lost something like 13 seats in the Senate, and I think, some 60 some seats in the House. They lost 1,000 seats in state legislatures. It's just like, it's preposterous to blame this on on an independent candidate who's basically offering people more voices and more choices. And I try to point out to people that there's a very simple solution that makes even the possibility of a split vote or a spoiled election, which is false to start with. It was definitely false in 2016. It was false with Ralph Nader. These are sort of a cherry picking of the facts usually go on to try to make that case that independent candidates, whether it was me or whether it was Ralph Nader, that we adversely changed the outcome of the election. In Nader's case, it was that the Supreme Court stopped the vote recount, which was clearly favoring which was favoring Al Gore, and George Bush was in the process of losing it. So that was really an act of the Supreme Court. It had nothing to do with Nader. Nader was one of many alternative candidates, and he's blamed for having a handful of votes at the time that the vote count was stopped. But it's a joke because any of the independent candidates could have been blamed. This was really part of a concerted effort. Now we have a name for it. We call it information warfare. Information warfare is recognized as a part of the war machine and a part of what empire does to maintain its hegemony at home and around the world. And it's really important to see the role of the mainstream media as part of that information warfare. And that includes the purposeful suppression of alternative candidates. That is part of how the empire maintains its stranglehold on power. I find it generally very hard to reason with people about what happened in the 2016 election, because usually people are they're coming from a place of incredible fear. They're not listening to rational arguments. I find what's really actually more persuasive for people is to clarify how this current system is really hurting them, how the war in the Ukraine war, for example, this superpower proxy war, is really impoverishing us and it is endangering us. And if you think that you are not in the crosshairs of this nuclear danger, better think again. And it's really important. I feel like the most important thing we can do right now is to just make the facts really clear about how people are being hurt, how people are being hurt in a devastating way right now. And that's more how they're going to change their mind. But in terms of, 2016, the facts did not support a spoiled election whatsoever. Exit polls done by CBS and others showed that the vast majority of people who voted Green were just not going to vote at all. Those were not Clinton voters. They were just not going to vote at all. So,
and that's what people don't seem to understand. Well, is that, when people vote in America, because we have this duopoly, this really monopoly, right? It's one party, but they manifest in this Democrat Republican. Because we have that, people cast votes when they vote in one of two ways. They're either casting a vote for a candidate they actually like, right? We see that there are some people who genuinely like that candidate, Trump or Hillary Clinton, and they're actually voting for those two candidates. Others vote against a candidate. That's how they're casting their vote. They're not voting for anybody. They're voting against somebody. So a lot of people voted for Donald Trump, not because they liked Donald Trump, but because they hated Hillary Clinton. And a lot of people voted for you because of the same reason. Hate Hillary Clinton, hate Donald Trump. Jill Stein's the person I'm going to vote for. So it was that's where the disconnect seems to be. They think that had people, because Green Platform is more aligned with somewhat the Democrat, I can't even really say that really, but I guess somewhat the Democratic Party. People believe the alternative was either you or Hillary Clinton, and no, people hated Hillary Clinton. They weren't going to vote for her. That vote was never there for her, and so they cast it somewhere else, or they were just not going to vote at all. It's Duverger's law. People don't really realize what that is, and that is the duopoly, the system. People will vote knowing they know that the vote cast could, if they vote for the one they really want, let's say, and that's a third-party candidate, that could mean the person they don't want ends up in office. So they often just vote against the person they don't want more than they vote for the person they want. That's Duverger's law. So that's what's happened, but people aren't aware of that. Or they're not wanting to really understand that. I think there's so much to talk about when it comes to the harming of third parties. Where should we begin on this?
Kim, before we totally leave that subject, I just want to, emphasize what hopefully your viewers already know, which is that this problem, the threat of a spoiled election or the threat of a split vote, is really obsolete just by adopting ranked choice voting, which could be adopted, at the local level, at the state level, at the national level. It completely gets rid of this notion that you have to vote against the person you hate
don't want
as your guideline for voting. Ranked choice voting lets you vote for who you want, and it allows you to rank order several candidates so that if your first choice is an underdog who loses, your vote is automatically reassigned then to maybe a your so-called practical choice or even a lesser evil. But you can control that. You don't have to risk helping the person you hate the most by supporting the one you actually support the most. So this is it's a no-brainer, and it is purposefully suppressed so that it doesn't get implemented. But I think there is a groundswell for ranked choice voting, and we've been pushing it for 15 years, I think, at least in the Green Party, and it is starting to get out now. So I think there is a real possibility that we can overcome this paranoia about voting against the candidate that you really support,
Right.
And instead,
but let's talk about then why that isn't being implemented across the board. There are some areas in the country that have ranked choice voting. Most of the areas don't have it. It's clearly not on a federal level. So there's powers that be, right? We've got Democrats and Republicans. They're in power. They don't want to give up that power. So they've made a lot of rules themselves. And they control, I should say, the rules. And so that's the biggest problem, in my view, in looking at why we can't get a third party to really gain ground in this country at this point, is because the people who make the rules are the people who don't want to lose power to another alternative party who suddenly comes up and either overtakes them, replaces them, or, usually what happens in this country also is there doesn't seem to be the ability to have a real third party. What happens is a third party comes up and overtakes one of the major parties and becomes the new major party. That's how it's been in history, is it just grows so big. Suddenly it's so big, it swallows up one of the two and becomes one of the two. Why do you think that from your perspective, doing this, you have all this experience, what was the biggest challenge against third parties? What is the biggest thing we face?
I'd say as a practical matter, the biggest thing now is the spoiler mythology. It's voter shaming. It's this, it's this demonizing of progressive alternative candidates. And I want to, for your viewers, I want to emphasize the goal here is not that suddenly a magical third party is going to come along, but rather that we create an open democracy. And, ranked choice voting can help do that. What's called proportional ranked choice voting. It's also called proportional representation, so that we can use this in our elections for like city councils or for legislatures or for Congress. There are simple kind of no-brainer solutions that are starting to get some airplay now that can really change how we think about this. Because right now this
But
whole—
stopping that? Who's stopping the ranked choice voting from even being implemented? I mean, sounds like a great idea. Many of us would love to be able to say, okay, this is my first choice, but if this person, maybe this is a smaller candidate, then I'd rather have my vote then go to this person and then this person. What's stopping that from being implemented?
Right. I mean, in my view, we have a full-scale, full-blown crisis of democracy on our hands. And, it has so many different pieces to it. But I think the overarching piece was really captured well by this former Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who had this great saying that we have a choice between vast concentrations of wealth or democracy. We can't have both. And as our economy has concentrated more and more wealth and power into fewer and fewer hands, our democracy is really compromised on all sides. And I don't think we're going to get out of here with just window dressing on this problem. And I don't think only one solution is going to fix it. In the same way that we don't have just one crisis out there that's basically threatening us with extinction of civilization and pretty much all creatures on the planet. I think it's the severity of this crisis. It's the fact that we have these converging existential crises. Any one of them alone would wipe us out. But the fact that we've got all of them piling on together really creates this unique historic moment where we have, I think, an unprecedented imperative for a democracy revolution. At the same time, we have an unprecedented opportunity for a democracy revolution as people increasingly see themselves in the target hairs. And it's not only that people are declaring their independence from the duopoly, people have signed off altogether on the institutions of government today. In the Declaration of Independence, it says, government depends on consent of the governed. Well, the governed no longer consent. And I think you know that very well. But you can see that, in kind of the skyrocketing rates of diseases of despair and self-harm. We see that in the statistics about young people, where 25% of young people now are contemplating self-harm within the last 2 weeks. We have really hit we've hit the wall. And I think right now what we're seeing is the collapse of society as we know it in slow motion. And the question is not whether people are going to rebel, because we are in rebellion. That rebellion is in full swing. And, I could see that in my 2012 campaign, where you go around the country and you talk to a lot of people. It was clear it was happening then. And it was all the more clear it was happening in 2016. But that rebellion, continues to be hijacked and captured by the usual suspects. But empire is not going to make it. Empire is going down in so many ways now, whether it's, economic competition from China, whether it's that we are driving Russia and China together. Who came up with that brilliant strategy to have not one but two unwinnable Cold Wars on our hand at the same time? Our so-called leaders have really lost their minds. And they have also earned the ridicule, the distrust, the complete revulsion of the American people. And because our modes of communication are hijacked by corporate America, but thank goodness for independent media, we depend on those modes of communication to begin developing another strategy and another plan. And right now, personally, I just feel my energies and efforts are very riveted on this question of how are we going to survive this war and our slide towards nuclear confrontation right now. Our leaders are that crazy that they do not recognize the danger, or if they recognize it, they don't care. They are just blinded by their greed and their ignorance. We have a huge battle to fight right now to even be able to struggle on all the other problems. So, what the larger solution is politically, I don't know, but I feel like the immediate challenge before us right now is to is to challenge the war machine, and to do that with the understanding that if we challenge, and we must, there has to be a political dimension to that challenge, for the very reason that Frederick Douglass articulated, that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, it never will. We have to bring that demand into the political universe, or we just get sidelined.
Okay, so let me then just paint this future picture and get your opinion on this. So the next election, 2024, the most likely spoiler, somebody who would be considered a spoiler, is going to come from the right. This is somebody that would challenge Donald Trump on maybe the libertarian ticket. And what would happen in this scenario is there would be a lot of people who don't want Trump back in office, so they won't vote for Trump. A lot of people are turned off by Joe Biden at this point. They don't want Joe Biden again. So let's imagine Joe Biden's on the ticket. Not sure if the guy's going to be or not. We don't know yet. But let's just assume the ticket is it's Trump and Biden and then third-party candidates. In that scenario, Biden, in my opinion, and I've said this before when it was Biden and Trump running against each other, I said Biden is the more dangerous candidate. I got laughed at for saying that, but I knew who he was going to be putting into the Department of Defense, Secretary of State. I knew that he had these Hillary Clinton era warmongers who were very, West exec advisors came from there, Michelle Flournoy, people that were really going to be pushing us towards war with Russia. I knew that was going to happen. And I said Joe Biden would march us closer to World War III than Donald Trump ever would. Trump is kind of moving us out of there. And he's maybe not an anti-war guy, but he's not really a pro-war guy either. Joe Biden, on the other hand, is pro-war. The people around him are pro-war, and that's what's more dangerous than anything. Was mocked for saying that. Now here we are, really closer to World War III. A lot of people now, I think, are in agreement that Joe Biden and his administration are more dangerous. They are marching us towards World War III. Now you've got Donald Trump out there saying, we need to be stopping this. We need to stop this war. We need to back off NATO, which is what he was saying in his presidency, right? We need to back down from NATO. We need to wind this down and try to make amends with Russia, which even Obama was actually trying to make a relationship with Russia. Hillary Clinton was undermining that behind the scenes the whole time. She's an extremely dangerous person. So now you're going to have these two candidates. Joe Biden, if he stays in office, many of us believe World War III is imminent. If Trump gets in office, there's a possibility World War III is not so imminent. So people will then say, if the spoiler candidate comes along and takes those votes from Donald Trump, and Joe Biden ends up winning again, then now here we are in World War III, and it's all your fault. You did this. You took those votes away from the candidate who maybe would have gotten us out of World War III, and now here we are being threatened with nukes all the time. People are being nuked. We're in World War III. Russia and China, a bunch of other nations have joined in as allies with them, and so you see this scenario playing out. So you're saying to me right now, you believe the existential crisis we're facing, there's nothing more important at this moment than the fact we're about to march into World War III. I agree with you. That's the problem, though, you see, because that same mentality was used even against you, right? That same mentality was used when they'd say, we're facing an existential climate crisis. And if we don't do something now, and this is what the argument was even in the 2020 election with Trump and Biden, so many people said, vote for Joe Biden. You had Noam Chomsky. I know he did the same thing to you in 2012. He was like, vote for Jill, unless you're in a swing state, then vote for Obama, right? He did. Noam did the same thing in 2020. Vote for Joe Biden. This is an existential crisis. Everybody must vote for Joe Biden. We cannot have Donald Trump in office. Bullshit. They were wrong. Joe Biden was more dangerous. Everybody should have known that by just looking at who his advisors were going to be. To me, that was so obvious, but it wasn't to them for whatever reason. Nonetheless, so that is what they said. They said it's an existential crisis because climate. That's what they said in 2020. So many people fell for that. They said Joe Biden's going to be the one that's going to solve the climate crisis. We are in an existential crisis. This is bigger than anything. You must vote Joe Biden. So here we are. So if it's always about the existential crisis, we've got a problem. We have to at some point say, but it's hard, right? Because World War III is, in my mind, a really big existential crisis. So I get it. I'm on the brink of saying, forget it. I guess for the first time, I'll vote Trump because I don't want Biden. I do think he's more dangerous. So even I'm now falling for it. I'm falling for the narrative that it is so important to get this person out of office, or it's so important to keep this person away from the office, that you have to vote for this other person, even if you don't want to, or else existential doom. I mean, we have to at some point break away from that mentality, I feel like.
To my mind, the existential nature of our historic moment is just true on its own terms. But what that means about elections is a whole other bag of worms. And I wouldn't say, that you move logically from an existential war crisis or an existential climate crisis to voting for any candidate who is sponsored by the beneficiaries of that crisis. To my mind, the existential crisis compels a real break with our usual approach, or I don't even mean usual. I mean sort of the prevailing corporate oligarchic approach to our elections. I don't think that we're going to save the world by electing Joe Biden or by electing Donald Trump. I mean, I think there are just so many pitfalls. And Trump's opposition to the war is largely opportunistic. And in my view, he's really not to be trusted any more than Biden, although maybe he's not quite as senile as Biden is. But I don't think either of them are going to move us the right way. I think it's really important to just reject all of the assumptions that go with our current electoral system. And, that includes that you only have two choices, or that it's not valid to vote for an independent political candidate. I think it's really important for us to fight for a whole agenda. And that includes ranked choice voting. That includes ballot access. That includes public funding of candidates, so that we actually have options on the ballot who are working for us, who are not being bribed by this system of official bribery. I just don't see how we can get to a different place by continuing to work through this extremely corrupt and violent system that has gotten us where we are right now. And every day within the reformers inside of this system, we just continue to go further and further over the brink. I don't see conventional politics or the two corporate political parties offering us a real opportunity for survival. I think it's really important for us, above all, to build a strong social movement that's going to compel our leaders to stop the war, to abandon nuclear weapons, to sign on to the nuclear ban treaty. There are any number of lesser goals that will help. They're not going to be transformative, but I think they will help. And the powers that be won't come anywhere near that agenda. Biden is not going to abolish nuclear weapons. Joe Biden is not going to support healthcare as a human right under a Medicare for all type system. He's not going to abolish student debt. that's just tweaking around the margins is the most that they're going to do. I don't think they offer us real solutions. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that our lives are on the line. We are in the target hairs right now. But that doesn't mean we embrace the system, or embrace the system in a different way than you did before. I think it's really important to reject this system that gets more and more corrupt by the day, and that only takes us further and further over the abyss. I think it's really important to stand with the courage of our convictions and move forward. And that may mean supporting a presidential candidate or not. I don't know. That's to be determined. But I don't think we have to feel compelled to embrace these choices that have already proven that they're horrific. They are just an expression of empire.
Well, I guess what people always just end up saying is now is not the time. That sounds nice, but now is not the time. Now we're facing an existential crisis. And in my mind, this time, there is more of one. I mean, I've always been an environmentalist, climate activist type person. And I recognize that we definitely need to clean up the environment and do things. I mean, I think everybody wants to breathe clean air. Everybody wants to drink clean water. These are things that I think are across the board. And so what level people believe there's a crisis, that is debated, I believe. But you're right in that when it comes to World War III, the debate is not there as much. People are recognizing we are really, truly on the brink of this. That's everybody recognizes that and sees that we are more so at the brink of immediate annihilation, potentially, than ever before for anything. I mean, we could, if we've got 10 more years with the climate, like some people believe, okay, that's better than 10 more months we might have before we break out in a nuclear war, or 10 days. Who knows when this thing breaks out? I mean, it's probably not that close. But so then people would say to you, Dr. Jill Stein, now is not the time. Right now, we've got to get Joe Biden out of office and we have to stop World War III. So you're just going to have they're going to tell you you're just going to have to run so that you can actually take votes away from Joe Biden, apparently, because you've got that kind of power, and get Donald Trump elected again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to this argument about this is not the time, I would turn that on its head, is that we've never been in a more dangerous moment. We've never been in a moment that's more preposterous to say, keep doing what got us here, and which shows absolutely not one hint of changing course, and I have to take issue with the notion that the Democrats are advancing, climate survival. They're really not, because they are creatures of, what should we say? They're big donors. So they play games. And if you look at a graph of how carbon emissions have, or the carbon content of the air, the carbon dioxide concentration in the air, it's just gone up and up and up and up and up for decades. And you can look at all of the agreements that the Democrats tout that they have achieved through the United Nations and the IPCC and all these things that we've invested so much time and promotion into. They haven't done squat. They haven't impacted the curve one bit. And that has everything to do with the fact that when push comes to shove, the Democrats pull back and they take the whole system back with them. So they don't mention actually transitioning off of carbon fuels. That's not mentioned anywhere, even in the IPCC's documents. It's absolutely outrageous when you look at it. It's really been leading us around by the nose, pretending that it's doing stuff when it doesn't really do stuff. And, and it's a sham. And if you look at this bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, which claims to be a climate bill and a healthcare bill, it's none of that. It's actually none of that. And in fact, it is a fossil fuels first bill, and it requires that 2 million acres of public land be used for fossil fuel or nuclear before it could be used for renewable energy. And it also compels that 60 million acres of offshore waters would have to be used uh, for fossil fuels before it could be used like for wind towers or something. So it's a scam. This is just another scam perpetrated by the rapacious oligarchy, who are equally in control of the Democratic Party as they are of the Republicans. And I think we're in this kind of magical moment right now where people know that the rejection of the Democratic and Republican parties is higher than it's ever been, that the number of people who identify as independents is higher than it's ever been. The cynicism towards governmental institutions, is higher than it's ever been. What we don't have is a means of communication. And that's, Kim, where you come in. You and independent media have to help us get the word out so we can leverage our power. In the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have enormous amounts of power. We actually have the power of numbers. We have the power of a moral agenda. We have, we have the power of the future and the power of young people and their aspirations for the future. We have all of this on our side. And so the powers that be work overtime to try to talk us out of our power. So it's really important that we not allow them to do that, and that we insist on our power and we follow where that power takes us.
So let's talk about some of the challenges that if a person wants to run and they say, okay, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of the duopoly. I want to run for president. What is the challenge that person might have? Do they have to join? In my viewpoint, it looks like they would have to either run on the Libertarian or Green Party ticket. They wouldn't have a choice because that's where the ballot access mostly is. Is there another way around that?
Yeah, I don't think so, without having huge amounts of money. And, where that money comes from is really important, because the money then exerts enormous power over the agenda. And I can tell you, because I know the Greens numbers very well, we don't have big donors. We are a small donor party, and that's a really good thing, because we should have publicly funded elections, period. And we should have a constitutional amendment that prohibits billionaires and corporate, power mongers from buying out our elections. So that shouldn't be allowed. But in the world that we live in right now, it's really important to have small donor funding. And I can say I know that's true for the Green Party. I don't know what the story is for the Libertarians. I don't think they are nearly so strict about where their money comes from. That's not to impugn them, but that's just to say, let's be clear about what kind of strings are attached to our party formats. Now, parties are flawed organizations. They are flawed organizations, and third parties have a very hard time surviving, let alone electing candidates. But over, since the 1930s, when small parties were really beaten back and all these horrific ballot access laws were established to basically make Democrats and Republicans unchallengeable. Since then, you don't see small parties lasting for much longer than 10 years or so. They're usually wiped out. And there are all kinds of forces arrayed against them, including COINTELPRO type forces. There are just huge hurdles to the existence and the survival, let alone successful candidacies. So parties are flawed organizations from the get-go. But I, like you, don't know how we fight the system without them. We need coalitions, and we need enduring coalitions that get clear about what is their agenda and how are they going to fight for it. So, yeah, that's why I'm a Green, because they're just, it's not a perfect party by any means. But on the other hand, if you look at the other options out there, they, there are a lot of problems. So to your question, how would you run? let me quote Brianna Joy Gray, who makes the point all the time that you got to start somewhere. You have to start. You have to put your feet down, and you have to start pushing, and you have to start building an independent political party. That's the problem with running as a progressive Democrat, because you build something, and then after the campaign, it is devoured by the usual powers within the Democratic Party. So your castle in the sand has just been completely washed away, and you have to start all over again come the next election. That's why we have to put our feet down somewhere, and we have to start building. And, I think this is a really exciting time. Having been through 2 presidential elections, I'm just so aware of how you have to build from the bottom up, because if you're coming from the top down, you're very subject to, to the problems within a party. If you haven't really developed a strong grassroots base, you're going to have problems internally. There really are no shortcuts. So, I think in the scheme of things, it's really important to build at the grassroots level and to be running for local and state office. That said, I think it's also important to challenge power. We should not give them a free pass, and we have to stand in opposition. And simply by doing that, we help move the curve. In 2016, our agenda, we didn't just change the agenda, we won the agenda, and our agenda, the green agenda, really became adopted by the progressive Democrats, whether it was Medicare for all, and that goes back to Ralph Nader in the year 2000, or whether it was, student debt, which I was ridiculed for by John Oliver. Thank you very much. Abolishing student debt, or free public higher education. All of that went back at least to 2012. Our election at that time. And by the time we got through 2016, all the progressive Democrats were giving lip service to it. But of course, the Democratic Party would not actually support that, because their donors are just vehemently opposed to every item in that agenda. So you do change the curve, but you have to build power. And I think you have to build power from the grassroots on up.
So it seems like there would maybe be 2 different agendas potentially, and I'm curious which one yours would be, what you would think you more align with. Having a third party like the Green Party running as a presidential candidate, you knew you were not going to win, right? I mean, I would assume you knew you weren't going to win, or did you? Did you think you would win?
I did not think I would win, but I didn't rule out some totally black swan event,
Right,
and
of
you
course.
never know when it's going to
You never
happen.
know. Sure,
So
sure.
put it
Okay,
this
so
way, I was prepared. I was prepared to be president.
Okay, well,
So
and you should, if you're going to run for president, you should be prepared for
I
that
I
potential.
agree.
Who knows? It may happen. It's not
Yeah.
likely, understand, but it might happen. And if it does, then I'm ready for it. Totally get that. But when you run as a third party candidate on the either Libertarian ticket, on the Green Party ticket, or American Independent, whatever ticket people decide on, that the chance of winning is actually pretty much zilch. It's not going to happen. So you're either doing it, in my view, for one of 2 reasons. Either you believe in democracy and you're doing it because you believe democracy means choice and that people should have more choices. And so you're not running to win, you're running for the you're running just so that people can have that choice. They can exercise that democracy, and that fundamental idea of democracy is important to you. Or you're going to attempt to run in order to really truly take down the duopoly. And in which case, if you have an agenda to truly crack the system, and it's not about just I'm giving a choice, I believe in democracy, but it's about we've got to stop this machine that's happening, the establishment, then you can't run on a ticket that is so narrow in its scope. You can't be a Green Party. You can't be the Green Party. It's too narrow. Too many people don't agree with the platform. Even me, myself, the only party I've ever registered for was Green in my entire life. I've only ever been a Green Party member. I was a climate person, activist as a child. I wrote a bill, tried to pass it through the government, anti-deforestation, did all of that when I was really young. And so I was a Green Party person. I now totally reject the Green Party because of the mandates. I'm so disgusted by them coming out and saying we support vaccine mandates that as somebody who is, I just can't. So that to me was like really disheartening. And as somebody who supported you in the 2016 and 2012.
And I'll just
So
say that was a very controversial decision in the Green
yeah,
Party and went a long way to split the party. So, I mean,
inside,
in
even on the
my
inside.
opinion, oh yeah, in my
Okay.
opinion, it was not a strategic move and should not have happened.
Well, maybe they'll backtrack on that at some point. The party leadership,
Possibly.
who knows? But
Oh yeah.
so if the agenda then is to crack the duopoly, to crack the system, then you have to put forward a candidate and a platform that is more broadly appealing to people on both sides of the aisle. That's the only real way to win, right? You've got to draw
Oh yeah.
voters not
Right.
just from Joe Biden. You've got to draw them from Trump too. You've got to get all of these people.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
what do you
And I
feel is
think
more your
aside from, sorry, go ahead. Finish
what
your
would be
thought.
more your agenda? I think, are you more a proponent of just the democracy aspect, or do you think this is truly the duopoly's existential, and we need to think of a strategy to get somebody in there who can mass appeal with a narrow platform? And I think that's the problem. Like even with the Rage
Mm,
Against the War machine rally that you and I both spoke at 10
mm,
points, I was like, come on, guys. Like, if we narrowed this down to like two or three, it would have been better than 10. You get more people agreeing. So, same thing with if we're going to crack the duopoly, we've got to get a platform and a candidate with a narrow scope that is more broadly appealing. What are your thoughts on that versus just, no, I'm going to run with all the things I believe in because I believe in democracy?
yeah. For me, those two strategies are very closely aligned because um, believing in democracy, to my mind, democracy is in such a crisis now, and that it's going to be so hard to fix anything if the oligarchs are calling the shots. That is the alternative to democracy. So, really blowing apart the system as opposed to running for democracy, to my mind, those are really closely aligned. And I see our democracy in such a state of crisis that it, kind of warrants going for broke. I feel like every day we are further over the cliff in this total meltdown of civilization. And, I myself feel a lot of desperation around that. And I see an awful lot of desperation around me. And I find it very hard not to run on your deeply felt truths. And for me and the society I see around me, this is a deeply felt truth. I find it very hard not to see how people are voting with their feet constantly to say this world sucks, and I'm really close to checking out of it. And, so I think it's really important to put the truth on the table. Now, as far as who supports the progressive agenda, you may remember, I think it was 2020, where Fox did a series of polls right after the election, and they found that the progressive agenda had huge support, supermajority support on healthcare as a human right, on abolishing student debt, on a Green New Deal, on the right to a job. It was issue after issue. And I have to say, that has been my experience as someone who has tripped around the country several times in national campaigns, talking to lots of people across the political spectrum. It's not so much right or left, it's really the elites versus everyday people who are being screwed. And just to be honest about that, puts you in a completely different position in terms of building consensus. Consensus isn't just something that you read in a poll. Consensus is something you build by really having I would call it almost I want to say kind of communion, because if you're actually trying to be of public service, people smell you as a completely different animal than they do if you are a traditional politician who is there basically to to advance their own agenda, their own wallet, the usual things that people feel about political candidates right now. People rightly feel that people have very self-promotional agendas within our conventional political system. But I did not find that happening at all outside of the conventional political system. And I think it's really important to be coming from a place of honesty and integrity where you really get that your future, you as a candidate, or you as an activist, or you as just Joe Worker on the assembly line, that our survival is all on the line, and it's going to take all of us to find a way back here to a world that works. And it's either going to work for all of us or it's not going to work for any of us, because it's just breaking down right now totally across the board, whether you're looking at people's individual health or our miserably failed healthcare system, or our schools and colleges and our local primary schools, you name it. Our system is not serving us. It's serving big political donors right now and the political parties. People have had it. They're really fed up. And I think we are at a breaking point. And our challenge is to turn that breaking point into a tipping point. And that matters so much. What is our shared agenda? And I think it has to be an honest one, and it's one that has to serve us. And I don't think it's rocket science to put that agenda together. I mean, for me, that agenda has kind of defined itself in 2012 and again in 2016. And I really don't see things much differently from that now.
I want to talk about one of the hurdles that doing exactly what you're just mentioning. One of the hurdles is something that you're actually fighting in the DC Court of Appeals, defending fair public funding. Can you explain to us what is going on with that, and why are you being asked to personally repay $175,000?
Thank you for asking. I am fighting the Federal Election Commission in court right now. 5 years after our campaign, the Federal Election Commission finalized a ruling, and they had lost quorum, so they were kind of in abeyance for a while, and then they got back together, and then they had a long delay. So it was one thing after another, where they finally allowed us our hearing to protest an interim ruling that basically said the candidate, needs to repay matching funds, a large portion of our public matching funds. So that's how come, basically, in a nutshell, we were getting hit 5-6 years after the fact, when campaigns have effectively shut down. Our campaign had shut down. We didn't have staff. We really had just a skeleton crew to finish processing stuff you're obliged to do as a publicly funded candidate. You have to go through an audit and stuff like that. So we were kind of on a very minimalist thing without staff, just a couple of volunteers helping to file forms and an attorney. And the FEC finalized this ruling that I have to personally repay them $175,000. The reason for that is completely crazy making. In 2012, when I ran on public funding, all of our ballot access costs were paid by public funds. Public funds you have to earn, you have to qualify for, you have to do all the paperwork and all that. But they were all considered legitimate. Getting on the ballot is what primary matching funds are for. So we assumed that would be the case in my second race. Well, it turned out after the fact, no, they decided to cut off those public funds about a little more than halfway through. They cut off those funds. Why did they cut off those funds? For the very substantive reason and I jest here, that the Democrats held their convention before ours. It had to do with the dates of conventions. So let me just say very simply, this is like a crazy, in the weeds kind of ruling that you would never know about. Unfortunately, that's how the FEC works. They have all these crazy, in the weeds rulings that you would never know about. And unless you have a whole big team of corporate lawyers, you don't really know what their rules are until it's too late. And then you just don't have any options. The FEC is run by Democrats and Republicans. It's a commission of 6 people, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, and they make all kinds of decisions that come out of the blue and you wouldn't know about them in advance. And they, what shall we say? They give a complete pass to super PACs, to dark money, to federal contractors, to all these things that are not supposed to be legal. They don't look twice at them, and they just give them a free pass. The FEC does not restrict super PACs, dark money, anonymous money, all these things that are really corrupting our elections. They don't do anything about. But do they look at small donors who are all, dutifully contributing within the proper limits? Yeah, they'll clamp down on that. And they will clamp down on small parties if you exceed any of those little guy rules. But the big guy rules, they don't bother with that because those are their big donors. So there are several levels of problem here. One is
Right.
just their rules about public funding, that the rules for small parties are very are impossible to work with, and
Can
they
I ask real
wind
quick,
up.
with the
Sure.
public funding, is this something that Republicans and Democrats also receive? So
They no
those parties?
longer they no longer do, but there was a time when they did. Yes.
Okay.
So and they get, so with primary matching funds, which is the thing being contested here, they are covered all the way through their primary campaigns. And for small parties, our primary campaigns depend on ballot access drives. That's what our primary is defined as by the FEC itself. They define our primary as getting on the ballot in
Okay.
50 different states with 50 different agendas. But for us, they cut us off when the Democrats and Republicans have their conventions. It's
Why
a
would that
little more
why would
complicated
they
than that.
matter? Like, why would the conventions of the Republicans and Democrats have anything to do with the Green Party?
What the FEC says is that that's fair. Fairness is defined by everybody getting cut off at the same date, which just happens to be what serves the Democrats and Republicans. They call that fair, as opposed to fair being fulfilling your requirements to get on the ballot. That is ballot access drives for small parties. That is fair, and that's what they convey by much of what they say on their website, etc. It leads you to believe, which is why we believed that we were being covered for our process of the primary, which was getting on the ballot. And then it turned out years later, lo and behold, no. So you pay us back. Oh, you don't have money in your campaign coffers anymore? Well, then you pay us back personally.
That seems kind of odd. Can't the campaign just go bankrupt or something and say, well, we just don't have it, the campaign? Because the campaign should be independent of you, right?
It should
You're the
be, yes.
candidate.
And that's the way they define it, is that if the campaign is no longer operative, then it's on the head of the candidate, and they will
Oh.
come after you for it.
So it's just like another way for them to discourage third-party candidates and third-party parties really from getting into the game, is that they can crush you because they know that that's a lot of money for a small party. That's not a lot of money for maybe Democrats or Republicans who get hit, but it's a lot for
Exactly.
independents who get hit and individual candidates who dare run on an independent ticket. Yeah.
Exactly. And the FEC has a lot of leeway to interpret its rules. I mean, that's why it has a commission of 6 people, and they have to validate all these decisions. If you try to read the FEC's rules, you can't. I mean, they have probably 20 different so-called advisory legal opinions on this question of, of when the public funding would stop in any given election. It's very confusing and ridiculous stuff.
Yeah.
And
So what's
they
happening with that now? So you're challenging this, right? So where are you at with this?
we are waiting on a decision in the Court of Appeals right now, and it could come in 3 weeks, and it could come in many weeks, and or many months. We don't know. And I was required to basically put $175,000 that is my kind of personal security and retirement into an escrow fund that the FEC
Wow.
will seize if they get a decision. And, so it's really disconcerting. And if I wasn't so bent out of shape about the war, I would be worrying more about that. And if people are interested, I'm at jillstein.net, where the whole thing is explained. If you want to lend a hand, you can do that at jillstein.net. But,
Yeah, I see you
as
have a
far as I'm
fundraising
concerned,
goal. I'm curious about this because I see you do have a fundraising goal. You've raised about 27,000, a little over 27,000 towards this goal, but your goal is only 65,000, but the amount is 175. Why is
that's
that?
right. Yeah.
Are you just gonna pay the
What we're
rest
trying to
yourself?
do right now, yeah, no, good question. And basically, we're trying to just cover our bases right now, and um, then move into a contingency fundraising so that people could pledge. You see, once we get a ruling, we have 1 month. We have one
Oh,
month
wow.
before they
Wow.
seize that funding. Yes, which is why a contingency, a pledge campaign is really hard, because it's really hard to call in pledges and then get them into your bank account and then get them into the escrow account in the time that we need to do. So it's really it's a conundrum, and you're screwed. You're screwed either way. Put it that way. FEC
Yeah.
designs things in a way that are not sympathetic and not helpful. If people want to help, I'd say help us raise that money right now, and we will return it. If we don't have to pay that 175,
Okay.
we can
Okay.
return it, and we can have a contingency fundraising campaign on that basis. But I've been too busy dealing with the war crisis right now to prioritize this again. But I do have to
Yeah.
do that, because one of these days that decision is going to get made, and then it's going to be too late to do anything about it.
Well, hopefully they rule in your favor on this, but jillstein.net is where you can go to learn more about the battle. It's written out there, and then also to donate there to help. It's kind of like retroactively donating to your campaign. So it's like if people supported you in 2016, then you got to go back and help, because now they're collecting on the campaign now, 5 years later, which is kind of crazy. But really fascinating conversation. I appreciate this conversation with you today, talking about third party and just really the challenges of third party. And really a lot of it, like you said, is mentality. A lot of it is mentality amongst the people. There's just so
Yeah.
much there. But so are you going to run again? I think that's the big question. I got to finish with that question.
Um, I've sort of been too busy to think about it. The question is coming up, I have to say. And, um, you know, uh, I say, let me know what you think. Um, it's not an easy thing to do. And to me, the bigger question is what I would run for. In a way, I would really like to run for a winnable office and win a House seat, and actually give us a real anti-war House seat, because we don't have one right now.
Yeah.
There are so many things that we don't have. I think it would be really dynamite if there was support for it. I would be very interested in running for a House seat.
Okay.
Presidential race is more of a mixed bag. I haven't entirely ruled it out, but it's not something I'm actually looking to do.
Well, Dr. Jill Stein, thank you so much for joining us today. Fascinating conversation, and best of luck to you, whether you run again or not. Best of luck to you with this FEC challenge that you're undertaking right now. I hope that everything just works out, and thank you so much for being here.
It's been great talking with you, Kim, and I look forward to the next time.